Hi, enjoy listening. The diesel hum of the city bus idled against the quiet of the small depot at the edge of town. Carl Henderson, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with thinning hair and a face tanned from years behind the wheel, sat in the driver's seat, sipping lukewarm coffee from a travel mug. Outside, rainwater pooled in the cracked asphalt, glinting in the early evening light. Carl had seen his share of strange sights working the late route. But the pair stumbling around the dumpsters across the street caught his attention. They weren't the usual crowd of hardened drunks or shouting addicts that haunted the neighborhood. The man was in his late 20s, tall, solidly built, but leaning heavily on a pair of crutches. His jeans were ragged at the knees, and one shoe was worn nearly to the sole. Beside him, a young woman rummaged through a torn black garbage bag, pulling out empty bottles and stacking them neatly into a plastic crate. She had long, dark hair matted in places from the damp air, and wore an oversized sweatshirt that could have belonged to anyone. They looked like they'd been through hell, and Carl, though not exactly a sentimental man, felt something other than the usual annoyance. Still, a thought crossed his mind, one he didn't like to admit. People like that drag the city down. He watched the man awkwardly maneuver to reach another bag, his crutch slipping slightly on the wet pavement. God, Carl muttered to himself. 30 years old and digging through trash. What a waste. But the truth was, it wasn't waste. Not if you knew what brought them there. The man's name was Ethan Cole. He hadn't always lived this way. Just 2 years earlier, Ethan had been a firefighter in good standing in Cedar Falls, a mid-sized Midwestern town with brick storefronts and a strong sense of community. He'd been the guy who volunteered for charity runs, who pulled kittens from storm drains for kids in the neighborhood, who could be counted on for an extra shift without complaint. Before that, he'd been a competitive weightlifter, the kind who could turn heads in any gym. But injuries had a way of rewriting a man's story. A blown knee ended his athletic career in his early 20s. And though firefighting had given him a second chapter, a bigger injury was waiting around the corner. The accident had happened far from home, on a non-union construction site in Chicago, where he'd gone to earn extra money. His girlfriend at the time, Vanessa, had pushed him toward it. She liked nice things, and Ethan's steady firefighter salary wasn't enough for her tastes. The job was dangerous, the crew was undertrained, and safety protocols were more of a rumor than a rule. One day, a steel beam slipped from a crane and came down hard on his leg. He felt the bone shatter before he hit the ground. The foreman didn't call an ambulance. Instead, he drove Ethan to an abandoned lot, told him to keep quiet if he knew what was good for him, and left him there with a warning. The people funding this project aren't the kind you cross. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. A co-worker who'd spoken up after his own injury had been found dead in an alley not long after. Ethan made his way to an urgent care centre on his own dime, telling the doctors he'd dropped a weight while training. They saved the leg, but the damage was permanent. He'd walk, sure, but never without pain, and never without a limp. While he was still recovering, Vanessa showed up in Chicago. She smiled sweetly, told him she needed his signature for something about the surgery paperwork. Too tired to read the documents, he signed. It wasn't until weeks later that he found out he'd effectively signed away his apartment in Cedar Falls to her mother. When Ethan came home, he found the locks changed and Vanessa living there with another man. She told him, with a smirk, that she needed a real man and that he'd be better off with the rest of the trash. Her new boyfriend promised to make sure he found the stairs on the way out, head first if necessary. With no home, no family left, and no one willing to hire a man he couldn't stand for more than an hour without pain, Ethan drifted. He ended up in a makeshift shelter he built himself out of plywood and tarps along a quiet stretch of the riverbank. It wasn't much, but it was hidden from the road, and he had just enough from disability checks to scrape by. That's where he met Leela, the woman by the dumpster with him now. He'd found her months earlier, half drowned in the river, a nasty gash on her temple. She'd been confused, disoriented, and unable to remember her last name. She said she thought her first name might be Leela, but she wasn't sure. The only clear thing she recalled was a pair of strong hands around her neck, squeezing until everything went black. Ethan had pulled her to shore and nursed her back to health in his riverside shelter. She never tried to leave. She said she felt safe there, and Ethan didn't ask too many questions about her past. Carl Henderson watched them from the driver's seat, his coffee cooling in his hands. He didn't know their story, but in that moment, he felt like he was looking at two people clinging to each other in a world that had thrown them away. He would have kept watching, too, if the rain hadn't started again, fat drops drumming on the windshield, blurring the pair into nothing more than shapes in the grey. It would be a long time before Carl saw either of them again, and by then, everything would be different. The rain that night didn't let up until well past midnight. In their riverside shelter, a low, patched-together structure of salvaged plywood, bent nails, and a blue tarp that flapped against the wind, Ethan listened to the water drum overhead. Beside him, Leela slept curled under two mismatched blankets, her face half hidden in the shadows. Ethan had learned she was a quiet sleeper, barely moving, as if afraid that stirring too much might wake someone who meant her harm. She still didn't know much about herself. Some days she said she thought she was from the East Coast. Other days she was sure she'd grown up somewhere in the Midwest. The only constant was that nightmare, those hands at her throat. Her hair was cleaner now, softer, after weeks of washing in the river and the occasional shower at the downtown drop-in center. She looked healthier too, though the faint scar along her temple told the story of the injury that had nearly killed her. The first time Ethan had suggested going to the police, she'd shaken her head so quickly it made her dizzy. "No," she'd whispered. "If I'm still alive, it's because they think I'm not. If I go to the police, that changes." "Who's they?" Ethan had asked. She just looked down, twisting the frayed hem of her sweatshirt. "I don't know, but I know they exist." Ethan didn't press. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to know everything to do the right thing. People deserved safety, even if their history was a blank space. Still, the more time they spent together, the more it became clear that Leela's life before the river wasn't one of street corners and shelters. She spoke 3 languages: Spanish, French, and what sounded to Ethan like flawless corporate English. She used words like liquidity and capital gains without pausing to think. And once, when they'd passed a luxury condo building downtown, she'd rattled off the square footage of its penthouses and which developers had backed the project. "Where the hell did you learn all that?" he'd asked. Leela had given him a sideways smile. "Some things stick, even when you've forgotten everything else." What stuck with Ethan wasn't just her knowledge. It was how quickly he'd come to care for her. He hadn't planned it. But after weeks of cooking together on a dented camp stove, sitting by the fire when the nights grew cold, and laughing at the absurdities of survival, like finding a half-working toaster in the trash, he realised that the part of him he thought was dead, the part that used to believe in building a life with someone, was still alive. One evening, when the sun slid low over the water and painted the sky in streaks of orange and violet, Ethan made her a ring from a pull tab and a bit of copper wire. "This is probably the cheapest proposal in history," he said, holding it out. Lila laughed, covering her mouth with her hands. "Ethan!" "I'm serious," he said, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. "We can't get a license, but I figure it's about deciding you're in it together, right?" Her eyes softened, and she nodded. "Yes, I'm in it with you." They married, right there by the river, with a heron as their only witness. For weeks after, life settled into a strange kind of peace. Ethan collected bottles and scrap metal to trade in for cash. Leela cooked whatever they could scrape together and kept the shelter clean enough to make it feel almost like a home. But the peace wasn't built to last. It started with a dog. They'd wandered farther than usual one morning, cutting through a newer part of town, near rows of fresh-built condos. Ethan was leaning on his crutches, scanning the alley behind a grocery store for discarded bread, when Leela froze. Across the street, a little girl was holding the leash of a large German shepherd. The dog's ears pricked, and in the next second, it tore free from the girl's grip and charged toward them. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, ready to shield Lila. But instead of attacking, the dog bowled her over into the grass and began licking her face with frantic energy, whining and wagging its tail. Lila's eyes went wide, and something in her expression shifted, like a door in her mind had just been kicked open. Her hand shot to the dog's collar, fingers brushing over a small round locket hanging there. Her voice trembled as she whispered, How do you have this?" In that moment, she remembered. Not everything, but enough to make her pulse hammer in her ears. Enough to know that the life she'd been living with Ethan was built on the edge of a very dangerous truth. For a moment, everything blurred. The sound of the dog panting, the chatter of people passing by, even the feel of the wet grass beneath her. It was as if someone had taken a crowbar to the locked vault in her mind. Images tumbled out, sharp and jagged. A modern office with glass walls, the smell of expensive cologne, the sound of her sister's laugh, the weight of a gold pen in her hand while signing contracts. And then, those hands. She remembered now. Her name wasn't Leela. It was Samantha Price. And she had never been homeless before the night she almost died. The German Shepherd, Ranger, had been hers. She'd raised him from a pup. The locket on his collar wasn't just decorative. It was a keepsake from her late father, with a hidden spring inside. If you pressed it just right, it opened to reveal a small photo of her holding Ranger on the day she brought him home. That night at the river came rushing back in vivid, sickening detail. She had been walking alone near the docks after dropping off a donation of winter coats to a downtown shelter. She'd taken the long way back to her car to enjoy the cold air, thinking about a business deal that had been causing tension in the family company. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. Quiet but first, then faster. She turned, and Eric was there. Eric Hadley, her brother-in-law. Her sister Caroline had married him 3 years earlier. Samantha had tried to be supportive, but she'd never trusted him. He was too smooth, too quick with a smile, too ready to sidestep a question. She'd suspected for months that he was trying to edge her out of the family business. Now, in the half-lit dockyard, his charm was gone. His face was tight with something colder. "You've made this harder than it had to be," he'd said. She barely managed. "What are you talking about?" before he lunged. His hands locked around her throat, squeezing until spots burst across her vision. She fought, clawing at his wrists, but he was stronger than she'd realized. Her last clear memory before the blackness took over was his voice, low and steady in her ear. "Once you're gone, everything goes to me." She'd woken up in a blur, not in the dockyard, but in a small fishing boat. The pain in her head told her she'd been struck hard. Her arms wouldn't work, her legs were lead, and she could feel herself being lifted. Then cold water. Then nothing. When she'd come to again, she was in the river, drifting toward shore, toward Ethan. Now on that neatly manicured patch of condo lawn, with Ranger licking her face, she realized something else. Eric thought she was dead. And if he saw her now, that illusion wouldn't last long. "Ranger," she whispered, pulling the dog close, tears stinging her eyes. "Oh God, boy." The little girl holding the broken leash came running, with a woman, Caroline, just a few steps behind. Caroline stopped dead in her tracks. The colour drained from her face. "Sam?" Samantha stood, heart pounding. She'd imagined this moment 100 ways, but never here, never like this. "Care," her voice broke. "It's me." The little girl glanced between them, confused. "Mom, why does she look like you?" Caroline didn't answer. She stepped forward slowly, as if afraid Samantha might vanish if she moved too quickly. And then, all at once, she wrapped her arms around her sister and sobbed into her shoulder. Somewhere down the street, a door slammed. Samantha looked up and saw Eric. He'd frozen mid-step, a grocery bag in his hand. His eyes locked on hers, wide with shock. In that split second, the mask slipped, and she saw the raw calculation behind his expression. Then he dropped the bag and ran. For a heartbeat, Samantha thought she might have imagined it, that Eric's face in the distance was just another flashback, brought on by seeing Caroline again. But no, she'd seen the way his shoulders stiffened the way his hand twitched before he bolted. "Stay here," Ethan said sharply, already breaking into a run. "Ethan, wait!" Samantha's voice caught, but he was already chasing after Eric, his long strides eating up the sidewalk. Caroline pulled her back toward the bench, still gripping her arm like she might lose her again. Her eyes darted from Samantha's bruised cheek to the ragged sweater, then to the dog leaning protectively against her leg. "You were dead." Caroline's voice trembled. "Eric said he told me you'd—" She stopped herself, glancing at her daughter. "He told me there was an accident." Samantha's breath was shaky. "There was no accident. He tried to kill me." The words were heavy, and Caroline's eyes widened as if she'd been slapped. "You can't mean—" "I mean it," Samantha said, the edge in her voice sharper than she intended. "Down at the docks, he grabbed me, threw me in the river. Her throat closed up, and she pressed her hand to Ranger's collar for grounding. "I barely made it out alive." Ethan returned, out of breath. "He's gone, slicked into a parking garage." By the time I got inside, he was nowhere. Caroline swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the ground. "If that's true, Sam, if Eric really—" "It's true," Ethan cut in, "and it explains why she didn't want to be found. Whoever did that might still be watching for her." Caroline turned to her sister, tears welling. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Samantha hesitated. "Because I didn't know who to trust. And I thought maybe he'd convinced you I was crazy or a problem." Caroline flinched, her jaw tightening. "I didn't know what to think. He said you left town after something went wrong with the company, that you wanted to disappear." A cold laugh escaped Samantha. "Disappear was his word for drown quietly." Ethan shifted, glancing down the street. "If he's seen you, he won't just let this go. We should get you somewhere safe." But safe was a word Samantha no longer believed in, because somewhere, maybe right now, Eric was regrouping. Meanwhile, in a black sedan 4 blocks away, Eric sat in the driver's seat, his fingers drumming the steering wheel. His mind was a whirlwind, but his expression stayed calm. He'd always prided himself on control. Losing it wasn't an option. Samantha was alive. That was a problem, but not an impossible one. He reached for his phone, scrolled to a number labeled simply M, and pressed call. When the voice on the other end answered, Eric said, "We have a situation. I need it handled quietly." Ethan's cabin was 40 miles outside the city, tucked behind a narrow gravel road that twisted through pines and ended at a weather-worn gate. He'd bought the place years ago for weekend fishing trips, but it had been sitting empty since spring. "It's off the grid," Ethan said as he pushed the door open. "No neighbours close enough to eavesdrop, no cell service, no traffic." Samantha stepped inside, Ranger at her heel. The air smelled of cedar and dust. Faded plaid curtains hung limply over small windows, and a stone fireplace stood cold in the centre of the main room. Caroline followed, carrying a bag of hastily gathered clothes. She kept glancing at Samantha, like she still wasn't sure if her sister was real. Ethan shut the door and bolted it. "You'll be safe here for a while." But Samantha didn't feel safe. Not with every creak of the cabin reminding her of dark water. not with the memory of Eric's eyes locking on hers that afternoon. Caroline broke the silence. Sam, about Eric. If what you said is true, then it is true, Samantha said flatly. And you need to accept that the man you've been listening to is not who you think he is. Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. I believe you. It's just, I let him in. I trusted him. And now you're telling me I handed him every chance to hurt you. You didn't know, Samantha said, softening. He's good at pretending. Ethan moved to the small kitchen, filling a kettle. We should talk about what happens next. He saw you, Sam. That means he's going to come looking. And not in a way we can predict. I can't run forever, she murmured. You might have to for now, Ethan said. Across town, Eric stood in a dim apartment, looking out over the street below. The man he'd called, Marcus, sat at the table, rolling a toothpick between his teeth. You're telling me she's alive, Marcus said slowly. Eric's jaw tightened. Alive and hiding. She's with her sister and some ex-cop named Ethan Blake. I want her found. Marcus smirked. Ex-cop? That complicates things. Not for you, Eric replied coolly. You're not going to knock on their door. You're going to make them come out, and when they do... He didn't finish the sentence, but the intent hung heavy in the air. Marcus leaned back. Got it. Loud or quiet? Eric's eyes hardened. Quiet. At first. Back at the cabin, that night, Samantha sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Ethan checked the locks one last time before heading to the spare bedroom. Caroline had already drifted off in the small loft upstairs. The forest was still, but Samantha's nerves weren't. Ranger's ears twitched every few minutes, his gaze flicking toward the window. Sometime after midnight, she heard it, the faint crunch of gravel outside. Ranger growled low in his throat. Samantha froze. The sound came again, soft, deliberate, gravel shifting under careful steps. Samantha's heartbeat slammed in her ears. She slid from the couch, motioning Ranger to stay low. The dog obeyed, muscles taut. She crept to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. Moonlight washed the gravel driveway in pale silver. Nothing moved, at least nothing she could see. Then a shadow detached itself from the tree line. Her breath caught. The figure didn't approach the front door. Instead, it circled toward the back, disappearing behind the cabin. Samantha darted to Ethan's room and shook him awake. Someone's outside. In an instant, Ethan was up, reaching for the handgun on the nightstand. Where? Back of the cabin. Caroline's voice floated from the loft above. Sleepy. Stay up there, Ethan ordered, already moving toward the rear window. He flipped off the interior lights, plunging the cabin into darkness. From the kitchen, they both heard it, the faint creak of the back porch step. Ethan signaled for Samantha to get down. Ranger pressed against her leg, silent but trembling with anticipation. Then came the scrape, metal against wood. Ethan's voice was a whisper. They're trying the lock. A slow, deliberate rattle followed. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. They were testing, probing, confident enough to take their time. Ethan crept to the door and braced himself. But before he could act, the noise stopped. Silence. Then from the front of the cabin came a single sharp knock, Samantha's head snapped toward the sound. "There's more than one," she whispered. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Stay here." He edged toward the front door, but the knock didn't repeat. Instead, a voice, calm, almost friendly, called out. "Ethan Blake? We just want to talk." Neither of them moved. The voice continued. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." From outside, another voice, lower, rougher, added, "Bring her out, and this ends easy." Ranger let out a low growl. Ethan looked at Samantha. "They know you're here." And then, without warning, the front window shattered inward. Glass sprayed across the cabin floor, glittering in the moonlight. Ranger barked furiously, lunging toward the broken window. "Back!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Samantha by the arm and pulling her toward the rear door. From the shattered frame, a hand reached inside, fumbling for the lock. Another figure's shadow moved quickly across the porch. "They're coming in!" Caroline's voice rang from the loft above, trembling with panic. "Down here! Now!" Ethan barked. She scrambled down the ladder, barefoot and pale. Ethan shoved a small duffel into her arms. "Out the back! Move!" Samantha pushed open the rear door, and the cold night air hit her face. The forest loomed like a wall of black. Behind them, the cabin door gave way with a sharp crack. Voices erupted inside, men shouting orders. Ethan fired a single shot toward the sound, not aiming to hit, just to slow them down. "Go! Don't stop!" They plunged into the trees, Ranger bounding ahead, his bark echoing. Branches slapped at Samantha's face, and roots clawed at her shoes. She could hear the men crashing through the cabin after them. "Split up?" Caroline gasped. "No," Ethan's voice was hard. "Stay together. If they catch one of us, we're all done." Somewhere behind them, a flashlight beam swept across the trees. "They've got lights," Samantha hissed. Ethan glanced back. "Then we keep to the creek bed. They can't track as easy." They veered left, stumbling down a steep slope until the sound of rushing water reached them. The creek glimmered faintly under the moon, and they splashed into it, the icy water biting at their legs. "Won't they hear us?" Caroline whispered. "They'll hear less than our footsteps on dry leaves," Ethan said, pulling them along. A shout rang out behind them. "There, by the water!" The flashlight beam jerked toward them, blinding for a second. Then came the gunshot, loud, sharp, and far too close. Ranger barked wildly, spinning toward the sound, but Samantha tugged him forward. "No, come on!" They ran until their lungs burned, the creek curving deeper into the forest. The men followed, their voices growing louder again. Finally, Ethan shoved them behind a fallen tree, motioning for silence. They crouched there, water dripping from their clothes, breaths ragged. The flashlight beams danced nearby, too nearby. One voice spoke, slow and taunting. "You can't hide forever." The men's voices faded for a moment, replaced by the sound of snapping branches deeper in the forest. Ethan motioned for Samantha and Caroline to stay low. Ranger's ears were pinned forward, his body trembling with the urge to leap. Ethan leaned close, whispering, "They're not just chasing. They're flushing us. They're trying to herd us somewhere." Samantha's throat tightened. "Where?" He shook his head. Don't want to find out. A sudden beam of light swept directly over the log they were hiding behind. Samantha froze, holding her breath. The beam lingered, then moved away. But she knew they'd been spotted. Go! Ethan hissed. They plunged deeper into the trees, the ground rising sharply beneath their feet. The air smelled of damp moss and pine. A gunshot cracked through the night, followed by a splintering sound as a bullet struck a tree, just inches from Samantha's head. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Ethan hauled her forward. They're trying to scare us into moving faster, he said between breaths. They want us to make a mistake. Caroline's voice shook. We can't outrun them forever. We don't have to outrun them, Ethan said. We just have to lose them. The creek appeared again ahead, wider here. Its current fast and loud. Ethan waded in, pulling them along. The cold made Samantha gasp, but the noise of the water would cover their splashes. When they reached the far bank, Ethan pointed toward a thick tangle of undergrowth. In there, now. They crawled inside, branches clawing at their clothes. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of wet earth. Ranger lay pressed against Samantha's leg, silent but tense. Minutes passed. The only sounds were the rush of the creek and their own breathing. Then, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Just on the other side of the brush. A man's voice came, low and sure. She's worth more alive. Don't spook her. Samantha's blood turned to ice. Worth more? Ethan's eyes locked with hers, a silent question. She could see it in his face. He wanted answers, but this wasn't the time. The footsteps moved on, but the words clung to the night air like smoke. Caroline whispered, barely audible. Sam, what aren't you telling us? Samantha opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the beam of a flashlight swept across the bushes, directly at their hiding place. The light froze on their hiding spot. Move, Ethan hissed, shoving Samantha and Caroline ahead of him. They burst out of the undergrowth, stumbling into the open. The forest seemed to close in from every side, voices shouting, boots pounding through the wet leaves. Two men emerged from the shadows to their left, blocking the path. One held a shotgun casually over his shoulder, the other a pistol gripped low and steady. Don't run, the one with the pistol said. His voice was calm, like he had all the time in the world. We're not here to hurt you, unless you make us. Ranger growled deep in his throat, teeth bared. Ethan stepped in front of Samantha. What do you want with her? The man with the shotgun smiled, as if it were obvious. She knows what we want. Been a long time coming, hasn't it, sweetheart? Samantha's breath came fast. Her mind felt split in two, half searching for a way out, half trapped in memories she had buried. Tell them, Sam, Caroline whispered, eyes wide. What is this? They're bounty hunters, Samantha said at last, her voice trembling. But it's not about money, not just money. The pistol man's expression shifted, half amusement, half warning. Careful now! Ethan kept his voice low. Bounty hunters? For what? Samantha swallowed hard. I used to work in procurement, overseas contracts. One went bad, really bad. People died. They said it was my fault. I ran, before they could make me disappear. Caroline's face twisted in disbelief. Disappear? Like kill you? Samantha nodded once. They don't want me to talk. I have names, numbers, accounts. I thought if I stayed off the grid. You thought wrong, the shotgun man interrupted. Your trail might have gone cold, but the price on your head didn't. Ethan's stance shifted, weight balanced, eyes scanning. And if I don't let you take her, the pistol man smirked, then we take you too. Easier than leaving witnesses. The forest went dead quiet, except for the rush of the Cree. Samantha could feel it. The next few seconds would decide everything. She glanced at Ethan. He gave the smallest nod. Then Ranger lunged. The chaos exploded. Shouts, a gunshot, the flash of metal in the dark. Samantha ran, Caroline on her heels, Ethan's voice shouting behind them. The night became a blur of motion and noise. When she looked back, Ethan was gone. Samantha skidded to a stop, her chest heaving. Caroline grabbed her arm. What are you doing? We have to go. Samantha's eyes locked on the darkness they had just come from. She couldn't see Ethan, couldn't hear him, but the gunshot still rang in her ears. I'm not leaving him, she said, her voice sharper than she meant. He saved us twice tonight. I'm not going to let him. She couldn't finish the thought. Caroline shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. Sam, if you go back, you won't come out. Samantha glanced toward the direction of the highway lights, barely visible through the trees. Safety was right there, but safety without Ethan felt like cowardice. She turned to Caroline. Follow the creek. Keep Ranger with you. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, keep going. Caroline's mouth opened to argue, but Samantha was already moving, low and fast, every step a gamble. The forest swallowed her again. She followed the faint sounds, voices, rustling, a low grunt. She spotted them in a small clearing. Ethan on his knees, one arm twisted behind him, the man with the pistol pressing the barrel against his head. The other man was cursing, holding his bleeding arm where Ranger had bitten him before being kicked away. Samantha's hands shook, but her mind was clear now. She reached into her jacket pocket, feeling the cold metal of the flare gun she had grabbed from Ethan's pack earlier without thinking. She stepped from the shadows. Let him go. Both men turned, surprise flickering into a slow grin on the shotgun man's face. Well, look who came back. Samantha kept the flare gun steady. You want me alive? Then let him go, now. The pistol man tilted his head, weighing her words. You won't shoot. That thing won't kill anyone. Maybe not, Samantha said, her thumb pressing the trigger. But it'll blind you long enough for me to run, and set this whole forest on fire if it has to. A beat of silence. The man with the shotgun cursed under his breath. She'll do it. I've seen her file. The pistol lowered, just slightly. Ethan didn't wait. He shoved backward, knocking the man off balance. And in the same motion, Samantha fired. The flare burst into a blinding white light, hissing and spitting sparks. The men shouted, shielding their eyes. Ethan was up in a second, grabbing Samantha's arm, and they bolted. They didn't stop until the roar of passing cars filled their ears. The highway appeared through the trees like a lifeline. Caroline was there, clutching Ranger, eyes wide with relief. They flagged down a trucker, who after one look at their faces, pulled them in without a single question. As the truck rumbled away, the forest faded into darkness behind them. Ethan glanced at Samantha. "You didn't have to come back for me." "Yes," she said, finally letting the adrenaline drain from her voice. "I did." He gave her a look that was half gratitude, half something unspoken. "So what now? They'll come after you again." Samantha stared out at the road ahead, the horizon just beginning to pale with dawn. "Then I stop running. I tell the truth, all of it, and maybe this time I pick the battlefield." Caroline leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. "Then we fight with you." Samantha met her gaze, then Ethan's. For the first time in years, the fear in her chest didn't feel like a chain. It felt like fuel. The truck kept rolling toward the sunrise, and none of them looked back. The truck rolled steadily down the highway, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. Inside, Samantha, Ethan, and Caroline sat wrapped in a fragile calm. Ranger rested his head on Samantha's lap, his breathing slowing. Outside, the world was waking up. Birds beginning their song, the sky faintly pink on the horizon. Samantha stared ahead, a quiet determination settling over her. She had no illusions that the danger was completely behind them, but for the first time, she felt in control. Somewhere far behind the forest's edge, two dark figures watched the road through binoculars. A faint, knowing smile touched one man's lips. "She's alive," he said softly, "and she's coming back." But for now, the chase was over. Inside the truck, Samantha squeezed Ethan's hand. "Let's go home." And the road ahead gleamed bright with promise. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.